خلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين صلى الله وسلم عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله وسلم عليك يا نبي الله وعلى آل بيتك الطيبين الطاهرين صلى الله وسلم عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا ابن رسول الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا غريب يا غريب يا مظلوم كربلاء ما خاب من تمسك بكم وأمن من لجأ إليكم فيا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما قال الله تبارك وتعالى وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال هل يسمعونكم إذ تدعون أو ينفعونكم أو يضرون قالوا بل وجدنا آباءنا كذلك يفعلون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. I begin in the name of Allah, the most kind, the most merciful. It's due to that kindness and mercy that we have these opportunities where we gather in remembrance and glorification of Him, Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And then we send our condolences to our 12th and living Imam, Al-Hujja, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala, Farajahu Sharif, and to each and every one of you. As we gather on these nights to commemorate the Istishhad anniversary of the Shuhada of Karbala, alayhim afdalus salatu wassalam. Yesterday we began our introductory discussion regarding our overall theme for the course of these lectures, and that is going to be about Reformation. And we will touch a little bit more about that today and then go into a specific subject. We said that Reformation is what our third Imam alayhi salam was seeking, isn't it? When he left Medina, this is a very famous qawl, a qawl that we should all know because it gives us the guidelines and it gives us the principles with which the mission of Aba Abdullah alayhi salam was based upon. He says, وَأَنِّي لَمْ أَخْرُجْ أَشِرًا وَلَا بَطِرًا, that I am not rising, I am not leaving joyfully or arrogantly, وَلَا مُفْسِدًا وَلَا ظَالِمًا, nor am I leaving to cause corruption or oppression. وَإِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ. I am rising and I am leaving only to bring about a reformation, a change in the ummah of my grandfather Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. And so as the Shia of Hussein alayhi salam, it becomes our responsibility to continue that reformation, to continue that movement that was started by our third Imam alayhi salam, in the hopes that this reformation that we are individually striving for will lead to a collective reformation of an ummah. Because if each of us did our responsibility, we would have a reformed ummah, isn't it? And so the hope is that inshallah we reform ourselves, and then we aim to reform our families, and then we aim to reform our communities, and then the entire ummah at that point becomes reformed. And that reformation or that reformed ummah would lead us to become an ummah that the 12th Imam alayhi salam can come and guide right away. Imagine if the 12th Imam alayhi salam has to come, and he has to make us better. Can you imagine how much of a tragedy that would be, that 1300 years of lessons were failed by us, that now the 12th Imam has to come and redo the work that was already done by his forefathers, right? And so we have to be that type of community that is ready for the 12th Imam alayhi salam to come, and that means constant reformation, right? Now, when we talk about reformation, exactly what are we talking about here? And this is an important point for us to understand. When we are saying that we need to reform, we are talking about a constant improvement, constant betterment of our entire being, right? Our thoughts need to improve, our ideas need to improve, our actions need to improve, our sympathy needs to improve, our conduct needs to improve, our morality needs to improve, our intellect needs to improve, our servitude, everything about us as a human being needs to improve, where today I become, or I am, a better individual than I was yesterday, and then tomorrow I am a better individual than I was today. That requires a lot of introspection, right? That requires a lot of pondering, requires a lot of muraqabah. When you look at the elements of jihadun nafs, or fighting the soul, there are numerous elements like muraqabah and muhasabah and all of these things where I take account of my soul, I reflect about my soul, I learn what mistakes I've made today so that I don't make these mistakes tomorrow. And as an individual, the aim is that today the things that I did that I regret, tomorrow I don't make those mistakes again. Now, am I going to make those mistakes again? Likely, right? Likely. But that doesn't mean that I have failed. Rather, when I do make that mistake again, it will lead to a certain sense of regret within me. And then, of course, longing for God to then assist me to come out of the stage that I'm at. So the constant improvement is what Aba Abdullah alayhi salam wanted, so that eventually we become the type of servants that God would be proud of. Now, this is not a foreign concept, right? The constant self-betterment. This is something that we do all the time for material gains. So for example, if I need a new skill to get a job, I will go after that new skill. If I'm bored and I need a new hobby, I will learn a new trade to get a particular hobby that I want. If I want a new job, if I want more education, whatever it is, in life, we are constantly working towards improvement. We are constantly looking for better and more satisfaction in our material world. What Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala wants from us is that He wants us to take that motivation that we have for material success and material gains and translate that into an effort to put in to become a better servant. So rather than just looking at it materially, He wants us to use those tools of seeking betterment to become a better servant. So again, this is not a foreign concept to us. We do this all the time, but now we need to channel it into that which is most beneficial to me in the hereafter, not just beneficial to me in this world. But then again, we have created many obstacles along our ways, right? Sometimes those obstacles have to do with our environment. We'll talk about that in future lectures. Sometimes it has to do with ideas and customs that we have inherited from previous generations that prevent me from moving forward towards Aba Abdullah alayhi salam in his way, or towards Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, because that's the ultimate goal, to work and strive to become a better servant for the sake of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. But I carry with me baggages that prevent that. And so over the course of these lectures, we're going to talk about certain characteristics that we need to investigate within ourselves to see if we have it, because these are the characteristics that are holding us back from reformation. One such quality we're going to talk about today, and inshallah continue tomorrow as well, that prevents our progress towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is known as ta'assub. Yeah, ta'assub. Ta'assub is translated as bigotry or partisanship. Okay. Sometimes it's also very loosely translated as racism. Okay. But ta'assub literally means a person who has partisan biases that lead that person to become a bigot. Now, what do these big words mean? We hear this a lot with your current president. These names are thrown around, or these adjectives are thrown around quite a lot about him. But what do they mean exactly, right? So partisanship is basically prejudice in favor of a particular cause, like in favor of a particular party. So no matter what my party does, I'm going to side with them even though my party is in the wrong. This is known as partisanship. Bigotry then is a product of that, which is an intolerance towards one who holds different opinions than me. So it's not that, okay, we can exist and we can agree to disagree. No, I know I am right. I know my way is better. And I'm not going to listen to what you have to say. You know, this sometimes appears very innocently, if I can use that word, when it comes to parenting, that sometimes we have certain ideas about how we were raised. And so we think that the way that we were raised is how it should be done today, when we live in a completely different time, right? And so I think that, no, I know better than you. I'm not willing to listen to you. And so what happens is there begins to have some friction. But this is a form of this ta'assub that exists sometimes in our lives, that prevents us from seeing the truth when the truth is right in front of us. To get a good definition of what ta'assub is, we come to a tradition reported from our fourth Imam, Sajjad alayhi afdalu salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When he was asked about asabiya, he replies back and he says, al-asabiyatu allati ya'asamu alayha sahibuha. He says the form of ta'assub that is blameworthy, and that if a person has this form of ta'assub, they would be punished, is an yara ar-rajulu shirara qawmihi khayran min khiyar qawmil akhirin. He says that a blameworthy form of ta'assub is when a person sees the worst of his own community as being better than the best of someone else's community. Y'all follow what I'm saying? Okay, this is important. I know we're getting into a bit of a definition here, but this is really important. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam says that the form of ta'assub that is blameworthy and punishable is when a person sees the worst of his community, the worst person in his community, as being better than the best person in another person's community. Yeah. وَلَيْسَ مِنَ الْعَصَبِيَّةِ أَنْ يُحِبُّ الرَّجُلُ قَوْمَهُ. He says it is not asabiya, bigotry, partisanship, when you love your own community. There is nothing wrong with that. وَلَكِنْ مِنَ الْعَصَبِيَّةِ أَنْ يُعِينَ قَوْمُهُ عَلَى الظُّلْمِ. But he says that it is asabiya when a person loves his community in spite of their wrongdoing and helps them in that as well. Yeah? That even when my community is doing something wrong, I will assist them knowing that they are wrong, but rather I may not even see that they are wrong, but I will assist them because they are my people. Yeah? These are my people, right? This is important because this is what Karbala happened in Karbala, right? When we look in Karbala, on one side, you had the best person who was ever living, who lived at that time, right? The most eloquent person, the most intellectual person, the most brilliant person, the most beautiful person, the most spiritual person, the best servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala existing at that time was there in Karbala. And on the other side, you had this large group of people whose only allegiance was a tribal allegiance. Because they were from the tribe of Shimr, they were going to stick with Shimr no matter what happened, even though they may have thought Shimr was wrong. They may have been from the tribe of Ibn Ziyad. They may have been from the tribe of Umar ibn Sa'd, or whatever it is, right? And when Imam alayhi salam spoke to them, right, their hearts were so entangled in being a bigot that they could not see the truth that was being presented to them, and they refused to join Imam alayhi salam. You know, this is the point, my brothers and sisters, that we can spend a lot of time talking about, right? Because you have to ask yourself a question, that What prevented them from joining Imam alayhi salam? Oh my gosh, imagine that, right? Like, these were not foreigners. These were people who recited the Shahada. These were people who read the Quran. These were people who prayed their Salah, like us, right? We think blindly that the Imam comes and boom, I'm going to join the Imam, no problems, right? But what guarantee is that? History has shown us that a large group of people could not join the Imam even though the Imam was speaking to them. Forget me. Like, if you have a person like me talking to you, and you can be like, you know what? I don't like the way this guy looks, right? I don't like the way this guy sounds. I don't like the way this guy makes gestures, whatever. You can come up with a million reasons why you don't like me. Fair, right? But when you have the Imam talking to you and you believe this guy to be the Imam, what prevents you from joining the Imam? This is why self-reflection is so important, right? This is something my teacher told me, and it's slightly off the subject, but I want to mention it to you from the very beginning, that listen, it doesn't matter how brilliant I speak, okay, and how well I speak, and what type of knowledge I drop on you on these last 10 nights. If you are not, if your heart is not receptive, you will not absorb anything I say. If you are just attending these lectures so your parents will be happy you attended this lecture, if you are only attending this lecture because it's a customary thing to do and I check box it and I'm moving on, I've done my due diligence, you're not going to get anything from this lecture. Your heart has to be with Imam al-Hussein. Your heart has to be with the azah that we are gathering for. Otherwise, you're not going to benefit no matter what type of speaker comes to you, right? That even if the Imam comes to us, if our hearts are not receptive, we're not going to listen to him. Look at Karbala. It's not like I'm talking and making things up. Look at Karbala. The best of people was talking, yet the people wouldn't accept, right? That just shows that if the heart doesn't want it, the heart is not ready, if we are not ready, then it doesn't matter. We're wasting our time then sometimes, I feel, right? If we are not working on ourselves to become better all the time, then we're wasting our time, right? And so this is why this reformation is so important. It's crucial, it's critical that we try to become better human beings. Every day I examine my life to see what mistakes I made, and inshallah tomorrow I don't make these mistakes so that I can become a better human being. We come back to the point on bigotry. Karbala displayed to us what bigotry looks like, what ta'assub looks like, where the people who were fighting Abu Abdullah alayhi salam refused to join the Imam, even though the Imam was providing for them all forms of logic and truth. Why? Because of their tribal allegiances. They looked at the people from their community as being right, and they refused to listen to the best person from the other side because they didn't agree with him and they rather be a tribal association. This, my brothers and sisters, was not one standoff event. Look at the world that we live in right now, right? I picked this category, picked this topic because we live in a time today, right now, where there is a high level of bigotry and intolerance that exists within the society that we live in. We see it in full display against the blacks in America or blacks anywhere. There's a high amount of racism that exists within our communities and in our nation against a group of people, and it doesn't stop with just blacks. It goes on with minorities, anyone who has a different system than us or a different idea than us or a different skin color than us. And we see this. George Floyd was one incident that took place that shook us, right? Thank God for cameras, honestly, because before this, it's not like these things were not happening, right? Cameras have allowed us to see firsthand the type of violence and brutality that exists against a group of people that you and I sometimes don't have many interactions with, and the interactions that we do have with that community are filled with that same racism, right? We have to look at ourselves to try to see whether or not this bigotry that we see displayed towards a certain group of people actually exists within us. We have to be honest. We have to be honest, right? Do we have certain sentiments against people of a certain skin color, right? Do we have certain sentiments of people with different cultural backgrounds, right? Like, this is amazing that your community is a very culturally diverse community. That does not mean, and I don't know anything about your community, right? But that does not mean that we do not hold bigoted ideas. We may not say them, right? But in my own family, for example, if this cultural group is late, we'll be like, these people are always late. Yeah. If this cultural group is known to be arrogant, we would say, look, their arrogance is being displayed. If this cultural group is a little bit reserved in their azadari, we'll say, look, this cultural group is like that. We have these bigoted thoughts in our eyes, in our minds, in our heads. Yeah. We can't hide from them. We have to be honest with ourselves, because if we're not honest with ourselves, I swear to you, being a bigot will prevent us from getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? It will prevent us from getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Right? Because what does Allah want? Allah wants submission. Right? But if I think I am right and I am the best and I know most and there's no one like me, then what good is the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to me? Right? What good is the lessons that are being taught to me? I'm already perfect, alhamdulillah. I don't need anything, right? And so we see that being this characteristic is something that we may look at it and say that yes, none of us can deny that bigotry exists in countries, like in all countries, right? But you're from America. It exists in America big time. It exists in Canada. It exists everywhere, right? But I think sometimes we're very quick to look outside and very hesitant to look within ourselves to see if we have these ideas. Okay, and this is something that we have to, because it's not like Islam is free of bigotry. No, we see how we treat each other. It's not like Shias are free of bigotry. No, we see how we treat each other, right? And so this is something that we have to examine within our hearts and our souls. Now, where does this bigotry come from? Okay. The fact is that no one is born a bigot, right? So it's not like you're born and you're like, I hate blacks. I hate Indians. I hate Pakistanis. No, no one's like that. No one is born with this type of bigotry and this type of hate, right? This is something that is gradually learned over a period of time, and then it becomes a way of life. So where does it start from? It starts from what's known as taqlidul a'ma. Okay, taqlidul a'ma means blind following. Okay, this is how we learn from the time that we are children. From the time that we are kids, we learn in one of two ways. We learn in what's known as an associative learning, or we learn through what's known as observational learning. Associative learning is when I can make a link between one thing to another, right? So I'll give you a simple example, right? Like when my daughter was very young, maybe 2 or 3, she saw the stove on, and so we told her, don't touch the stove, it's very hot, right? But she's 2 or 3, she doesn't have the concept of something being very hot and not good, so we tried to warn her as much as we could. And then one day her curiosity led her to the oven to touch the oven, and she touched the stove top and she burnt her fingertip. Till this day, alhamdulillah, she's not touching the stove again, because she learned. She associated a particular act to a particular result. We do this all the time, right? So for example, like if I say something and I get a lot of blowback from what I have said, I may not repeat that again, because I've put 2 and 2 together to say, okay, that was maybe a little bit too real for the people to grasp at this time, right? And so associative learning is something that is a form of it's a way that we learn something. The other way of learning, which is the most wide way, is what's known as observational learning. This is primarily how children learn. There are this old adage that it says, like, do as I, they say, don't do as I do, but do as I say. That's not true at all, right? Like, kids will not go with what you say, they will go with what you do, right? And so the kids are always learning. So for example, um, like you get a telemarketer who calls you and you tell your child, Baba, tell him Papa's not home, right? Um, what's the kid learned, right? The kid has learned that it's okay to lie in certain instances. That's what the kid has learned. The kid has not learned that my dad's trying to avoid talking to a telemarketer, right? Like I give the story all the time. I remember the first time when when lying became like something that was an option, right? Like I was playing, this is back, I used to live in Los Angeles, and I was playing basketball, and I won't tell you who I was playing basketball with, but I was playing basketball with somebody, and we were playing 2-on-2, and I had the ball, and I dribbled out of bounds, right? And so I was just like in shock. I mean, you can imagine how naive I was, right? But I was in shock. I didn't know what to do, so I called my teammate over, and I was like, hey, I dribbled out of bounds. Should I tell them? And he was like, no way, it's game point. Don't tell them. Just keep going. And what I learned at that time was that, man, it's okay to lie sometimes, right? It's not that we were trying to win this game, but in my mind, the learning that took place was, oh, it's okay to lie sometimes. And this is how we observe things. This is how we learn things, right? And so blind learning or observational learning takes place, and we may not know the full causes of it, but it actually implants seeds into our hearts that will manifest itself at a later time. So simple things like our love for Imam Ali alayhi salam is an example of taqlidul a'ma. Our love for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is an example of, from the time we were children. My 3-year-old daughter today does matam. She wears black now during Muharram. She doesn't have an intellectual idea about Imam al-Hussein. No, she does it because her parents do it. We told her to do it and she's doing it. But this love that we are establishing in her heart today will grow into something beautiful, inshallah. But it establishes itself in that way. So observational learning and taqlidul a'ma, blind following, is not always bad. Sometimes it actually serves a great purpose, like the hope of Ali and the love of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is taught to us through this blind following. But sometimes blind following can be very problematic, right? For example, sometimes the comments we make about other races at a dinner table, right? The comments we make about people of a different culture. Um, Subtle things, like I may drive through a certain neighborhood and see a certain group of people with a different skin color, and I roll up my window. Yeah, I lock my door, right? Say, oh no, let's get out of this neighborhood. Subtle things, subtle things. We're passing on this message that we are superior somehow to this other group of people, and that they are less than us. Um, and this is problematic, right? Because we are, the thing, like where it becomes very difficult is that we have certain stereotypes about certain groups of people, and when those stereotypes are met, it just ferments that idea in our heads, right? um, that certain people are like this. So for example, if we think that a certain group of people can't, like a certain background of people can't drive, so that's in our head, that they can't drive. And then there's a person who's of that race driving a car and they're driving slow. You'd be like, you see, I told you they can't drive, right? This is what we do, right? This is what we do. Now, just because one person met that stereotype doesn't mean that it's a stereotype. It's like everybody is like that, right? Like imagine, like we're fighting this all the time as Muslims, right? As Muslims, we're saying that no, we're not terrorists, and then you got this group ISIS doing all these things, and you're like, no, no, that's not us. But then we do this to other people. You see how problematic it is, right? Just because certain people do something, it doesn't mean that all people within that race do that particular thing. This is where it's something that we have to be very cautious about, because these ideas that you and I have, that we have inherited, we are now passing this on to our children, right? And unfortunately, what's happening is that we continue to live in a society that never progresses. Why? Because we can never pass these bigoted ideas that we have. We keep mentioning them, talking about them, and passing them on to one another. Now, these ideas that we're talking about today, this taqlidul a'ma, this blind following, things that we have inherited, picked up, heard about, and now it becomes a part of who we are, they're problematic. But it really becomes problematic when it now goes to a secondary stage known as inad. Inad means obduracy, or a high level of stubbornness where I refuse to change my opinion of what I believe to be true, even though um, I am presented with facts and logic that contradict my beliefs. You understand what I'm saying? Right? So for example, um, like let's say person X has certain ideas about black people and say that blacks are like this and blacks are like that. Then they have a neighbor move in who's black, who's completely opposite. But they are not willing to let go of their racism because they are now crossed over to this level of being in muta'annid, yeah? Like they're stubborn. They're obdurant. They refuse to go to think and to accept something else. And this is something that we see in our society all the time, right? Like one's allegiance to one's party or one's allegiance to one's race will make them act completely contradictory to facts and logic. Like people, for example, who deny climate change. And you're like, climate change is happening. And they're like, no, no such thing as climate change. And you're like, you can't be serious, right? Or people who deny that um, there's problems with the gun laws. They're like, no, freedom of rights. I can hold my gun. And you're like, you're kidding me, right? People are getting killed left, right, and center. No one needs an AK-47. No one needs all of these things. But no, why? This is my right. And you think about that, like present day, there's a pandemic going on, and there's people who are like, no, I won't wear a mask because it's my freedom of choice not to. And you're like, dude, it's a pandemic. It's not your freedom of choice here that we're concerned about, right? But you look at this idea, we see this, yeah? Like, I hope you're relating this material to present day life of what I'm talking about. We see this all the time in the world that we live in. And this stubbornness causes people to act in a bigoted way. This is when they become a muta'assib, where now not only do I think I am right, but now I am intolerant towards those who don't think like I think. Okay? People who don't think like me, you and I can't see eye to eye, and I will display my intolerance towards you. You know, you just look, right? And I'm going to keep talking about this, that slavery ended. Racism never ended, right? Rather, that form of slavery simply took a different form, right? And this is what systemic racism looks like, right? So for example, nationalism will continue. Um, Laws will change to where a particular group of people are targeted more often, financially, economically, housing, all of these things will be created in a certain way to constantly make sure that that slavery that ended a while ago continues in a different way today. This is something, my brothers and sisters, we see taking place. But at the same time, you and I have to be honest with ourselves to ask whether I am a person who is stopping this type of racism and putting an end to this type of racism, or am I simply a person who's adding fuel to this fire, right? How do I view people who are different than me, right? Are these standards that I hold of difference God-centric, or are they personal? I think this is a really important question that you have to ask yourself. When I view people as being different than me, and hence that difference leads to a feeling of superiority over them, are those based on God-centric ideas that Allah has defined it like this? Or is it because of my old cultural backgrounds, my own nationalistic ideas? Um, many of us come from a place where we were colonialized. Yeah. Whether, for example, I came from Africa where the British had colonized us. Others come from India, Pakistan, Iraq. Most of us come from a place where we were colonized, right? And we don't realize that till today, we have a colonial mentality where the quote unquote white man is superior. And whatever the white man says, I'm going to agree and I'm going to be submissive to what he wants. And because he wants me to continue being bigoted towards a particular group, you find that we continuously do so, right? We continuously act in this way. And so this is a message that I want to ask ourselves, is that where did this come from? It's not from Allah. It's not from our religion. Allah answers this in the Quran. قَالُوا بَلْ وَجَدْنَا آبَاءَنَا كَذَلِكَ يَفْعَلُونَ. He says, no, we saw our forefathers doing this, and so we continue to do so. My brothers and sisters, we got to take a hard look within ourselves, okay, and ask ourselves that do we have these bigoted ideas? Do we have ideas that we are superior to somebody for reasons that are not logical, like race, nationality, culture, gender, right? All of these things, we sometimes have this. You know, I get these questions all the time, and I know my time is running out. It's hard to listen while you're sitting at home on your sofas. I can tell you, I can talk forever, but it's not easy to listen the way you are listening, yeah? But I get this all the time, right? Like, especially, like I've said this, I teach like the higher grades of madrasa. And I tell my kids, especially the girls in my madrasa classes, that look, man, I don't think it's easy being a girl in Islam because you are culturally fed ideas that really sometimes don't exist in Islam, right? And you have to accept these ideas. Otherwise, how shaky will your faith be, right? And so I get these questions all the time. They're like, Maulana, I cook for my family, I clean for my family, and then we do a nazar, and I'm told to stand behind the men. Why? Yeah, am I not equal to my? And you know, there's nothing in Islam about this, right? There's nothing in Islam about this. This is cultural, and these cultural ideas that men are superior to women, right? Men have been given wilaya, no doubt, no doubt. But that wilaya is not supposed to become something that I use as a stick to put somebody down. That wilaya is responsibility. I'm going to be judged by Allah if I handle that wilaya correctly. Not that I subjugated somebody else with that wilaya. But sometimes culturally, we practice bigoted thoughts, not only against people of different races and different cultures, but even against people of different genders, people within our own families sometimes. And so this discussion is crucial, it's important, and I want us today to reflect about this, right? I think I've given enough examples to reflect and to see whether or not we have this form of bigoted stubbornness within us, because if we do, when the truth comes to us, we will not be ready to accept it. We will not be able to accept it. Forget being ready. We will not be able to accept it. And we see that in Karbala, right? That the truth came to them. The truth came to them. The light came to them. Yet they couldn't accept the truth. They couldn't accept the light, right? And this is not a mistake that you and I can afford to make, because our entire akhirah is at stake, right? We will inshallah continue this topic tomorrow by giving Quranic examples of this. And then we will look towards trying to see what are the main causes of this. We talked about how it's developed today. We're going to look at how it's caused. And then in the final nights, we'll look at remedies, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma. Tonight is the second night of the narration of the tragedy of Karbala. We lament, yeah. And you know, this musibah is hard because we feed off each other's tears. We feed off each other's emotions. But I want us to really look hard, yeah, and be able to cry. Because when the month of Muharram came, the Ahlul Bayt cried. You know, Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam says that when the month of Muharram started, you could see that my father changed. Yeah, my father stopped laughing. My father stopped joking. And when the 10th of Muharram came, it was like the tragedy of Karbala was taking place right in front of us. He says that my father would call poets, and poets would come and they would recite, and my father would cry, and all of us along him would cry. Our eighth Imam alayhi salam, it is said that one day during the month of Muharram, his companions came to see him and they saw the Imam alayhi salam crying. And the Imam alayhi salam says to them, he says that at the time of Jahiliyyah, the Juhala respected the month of Muharram and did not fight. But it is this ummah that fought the grandson of Rasulullah in this very month that has been forbidden by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam alayhi salam says, In kunta bakiyan fa'abkil Hussein. He says, if you are to cry, then cry for Hussein. فَإِنَّهُ قُتِلَ وَذُبِحَ كَمَا تَذْبَحُ الشَّاةِ. Because he was slaughtered the way that you slaughter an animal. And the Imam says, along with him, 17 family members died. Tonight is the 2nd of Muharram, my brothers and sisters. We are told that it is on this day that the caravan of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam reaches Karbala. They were proceeding from Makkah headed towards Kufa when they reached a land. When they reached a land, they say, Khutbah say that the horse of the Imam refused to move forward. The Imam alayhi salam stopped his caravan and he began to ask around him. He says, tell me, what is the name of this land? Someone said, Ya ibn Rasulillah, this land is known as Ghadariya. The Imam alayhi salam says, tell me, is there another name? They said, Nainawa. He says, is it go by another name? They said, Taf. The Imam says, no, tell me, is there another name? And that is when he heard that this land is known as Karbin wa Bala, that this is Karbala. When the Imam heard the name of Karbala, he looked towards his family and said that this is where we will stop. This is where the blood of my household will be shed. This is where our women and children will be taken as prisoners. This is the land that my grandfather informed me about. History tells us that the Imam alayhi salam, when he found out that this is Karbala, and when he made it aware that this is Karbala, that he purchased this land from the Banu Asad, the tribe who belonged there. And then Imam alayhi salam gifted this land back to the Banu Asad. But he said to them, I am gifting this land to you on one condition, that after my shahadat, you come and you bury my body and those of the companions. And then Khutbah say that the Imam alayhi salam called the women of the Banu Asad tribe and said to them that if your men are too fearful to come and bury our bodies, then I ask that you, the women of Banu Asad, you come and bury. I wonder if the Imam alayhi salam called the children of Banu Asad and said to them that, listen, if your parents cannot do this, then you come with little hands and you throw sand over our bodies. But we say to you, Ya Aba Abdullah, that how is a body recognized? A body is recognized by its head, but your head was severed in Karbala. Your body was trampled in Karbala, oh Hussein, how would anyone recognize you? They say that on the 11th of Muharram, that when the ladies and children were taken around the Qatlaga to see the bodies of their loved ones, they say that when Zainab looked at the body of Hussein, she could not recognize it, and she said to it, Anta Akhil Hussein? Are you my brother Hussein? Ulama say, my brothers and sisters, that when Zainab alayhi salam comes back from Sham, and when she comes back after being taken as a prisoner, and when she throws herself on the qabr of Imam al-Hussein, ulama say that I wonder if Hussein alayhi salam looks up from the qabr and says, Auntie Ukhti, are you my sister Zainab? What has happened to you on this journey? فَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ.